industry is clearly moving toward electric.
I will end the electric vehicle mandate on day one.
It's 2024, the middle of a chaotic election year, and at least for electric vehicles, it seems like the sky may be falling.
Americans don't want these cars.
EV startup Fisker are officially filing for bankruptcy.
But there's also lots of people and evidence pointing against that narrative.
With the assertion that EV sales are going down, they are in fact going up.
Volkswagen will be investing $5 billion in Rivian.
So what's actually going on? And could Americans on the left, the right, and all around support our country and EVs in the race against
China? A 100% tariff on electric vehicles imported from Beijing this week.
Plug in that oversized charge cable into your electric car, take a seat, and have a listen. I'm Max Patton, a young EV journalist, advocate, and just all-around nerd, and this is Directly Current, my opportunity to have half an hour with electrified experts and political experts to give you the breakdown on what's moving the needle for EVs in the US. Let's jump in. To kick off our first episode, I have Mike Murphy as a guest. He is a Republican political legend in campaigns. He's venerably served on many famous national ones you've probably heard of. You can look him up, but he hosts Hacks on Tap with his buddy David Axelrod to talk about bridging political divides in general, looking at campaign strategies. Most recently, he has been really interested in electric vehicles, which is why he's helping me with this project. And so I'll let him kick it off from a hotel room at the DNC in Chicago, where he currently is. Let's have Mike introduce himself.
Thank you, Max. It's great to be here on the inaugural issue. Well, like I have been for, it feels like 100 years. I'm on the campaign trail. I just left the Chicago convention being a political consultant. I was there doing some work for EV politics, which we're going to talk about. And I'm a pundit on NBC, and I do a podcast with David Axelrod called Hikes on Tap. So I had plenty of stuff to work on there, but I've been looking forward to this because we've talked about doing a podcast in conjunction with EV politics and the American Alliance to talk about this weird world we're in, especially in the middle of a big, hotly contested presidential election where the world of EVs and the world of politics are smashing together, and not always in a good way. You're going to be the star of the show here, so tell me what you're trying to get done with the podcast as we do all this, and then maybe we can do the origin story of EV politics and why EVs have become a political football and what that means.
Yeah, so folks heard in the opening, I'm an EV journalist, or that's what I worked in before, now going back to grad school as a student again. But this opportunity, Mike, came about. I think you had this idea for the EV politics project and then highlighting things like EV jobs, making them a campaign issue. And then what you're doing is you're giving me a mic and the opportunity to basically get a lineup of guests who are going to fill us in on how America can use EVs to unite right and left, make jobs, and not be this partisan issue in a negative way like it is so far, where, you coastal quinoa eating, whatever, flip-flop wearing folks are driving EVs, venture capitalists. I think the exciting thing for me covering the space in a non-political way has been just observing the market, right? Prices are crashing. And okay, that sucks for the Tucker Carlsons and the coastal elites of the world who have a Model X and it's depreciated threefold in 2 years. But it's so great for folks who are getting on board with an EV now. And as I think we'll talk about, it's not all about saving the planet or the environment. There's lots of really interesting practical considerations as to why this is our future, and also a little bit of ominous foreshadowing with some of our rivals in the space geopolitically.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I think it's going to be a great podcast, and I'm so glad you're on board to lead it. Let me give you a little of the story of how this thing came to be. I've been in politics a long time on the Republican side. I'm not a big Trump guy. I first bumped into him in 1993 when I was running politics for the governor of New Jersey, and he was down in Atlantic City. But I'm a conservative free market Republican. I'm also from Detroit, and I'm a car nut. So for most of my life, my miles per gallon average was around 4.5. If I could have got my hands on a Sherman tank, I probably would have tried to have one of those in the backyard. I like big engines. I like performance. But I started driving a couple of EVs out of curiosity a few years ago because the technology appealed to me. And I love instant torque. I love speed. I like quiet cars too, even though the roar of an engine is fine. And I've been in that business in my life. As an efficient transportation thing that's a hell of a lot of fun to drive, they are hard to beat. So when I saw people in my Republican Party trashing EVs, for no good reason, by the way. One, I decided to do something about it. And two, I got very curious. So I founded the EV Politics Project at the end of last year. And I broke every rule of political consulting by putting some of my own money into it. My wife thought I was crazy. And I got my old friend, Dr. David Hill, who's one of the top Republican pollsters. He is also just in the weird world of the kind of fun people who show up in the political world. He was, as a young grad student, so maybe you'll follow his example, Max. He was the rock concert promoter who brought the Rolling Stones to Alabama a long time ago. So he had a DeLorean back way when. He is a real car nut, and he's been an EV driver for years. So I called up Dr. Hill and I said, hey, let's do our own poll nationally, and let's learn about what's tangling up EVs here. How has a vehicle that people ought to choose for what they need in a vehicle, what they like in a vehicle, they're stuck in that thing for their commute. It's an important and expensive buying decision. How has that become all about politics? And has that jammed it up? So we did really the first major piece of campaign style research, because that's the world we come out of, selling candidates and causes. On the Republican side, what is the beef? What's the problem? And we learned a ton. So I published the results. We beefed up the website. It's evpolitics.org, and you can see a lot of our polling there and a lot of other stuff. Then that attracted the attention of the trade press and the industry. So I started popping up both on enthusiast YouTube channels and podcasts, and also in the automotive news, and then The Economist picked it up, and New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. And I started talking to the companies. So what we do at evpolitics.org is we have a lot of different programs all under two rubrics. The first one is, how do we help the companies market better? What do we learn from the polling? How do they talk to consumers? Because the biggest problem in EVs, beyond technical stuff of, the Electrify America charger didn't work, or, the weight of batteries and all the stuff that's being solved. The biggest problem is because they've become political, many Republicans are buying EVs. EV sales are growing, but they're growing really slowly with Republicans. And people who identify Republican in politics are 40% approximately of the new car buying public. Democrats are 36%. The rest are independent or people who choose not to vote and participate. So if you have 40% of the market saying, these run on devil juice and I can't buy them, they're Biden mobiles, I turn into Bernie Sanders if I drive one. If all that misinformation gets in the way and nobody's thinking about, boy, it would be great not to spend $2,000 a year on gas. Wow, this thing is so fun to drive. I can plug it in my garage at night and I'm set, etc. And instead it's gunked up with politics. We're going to have a real hard time in our domestic market with EV adoption. And that's bad for a lot of reasons we're going to talk about. And then finally, the other rubric we do is nobody is discussing in the campaign the most important aspect of EVs, which is not climate, it's jobs. EVs are taking over the world market. And the US is only 10% of car sales, but it's the most lucrative market. It's very important. Our foreign competitors, particularly the People's Republic of China, with a massively subsidized industry, their government, and remember, that's a government that doesn't ask you, the voter, what you think. Here's what's going to happen, comrade. They've decided to take over the world auto industry. They want 90% of auto production in 15 years. They want GM, Ford, Volkswagen, Stellantis, Toyota, if they could get away with it, all to be gone. And so they're buying world markets. And if the people, either from the US, the Fords of the world, the Rivians, the GMs, or countries that we may compete economically with, but we're strong democratic allies like Germany, like France, Italy, the UK, South Korea, Japan. If we don't get on the EV bandwagon, the American auto industry, as we know it now, will no longer exist in 20 years. And that's a lot of good middle-class jobs. I know my family had them. So sorry for the long answer, but we're working on two things. Making this a jobs issue in the campaign. Our core organization is called the American EV Jobs Alliance, and exploring the Republican problems and how do we break it down and make EVs about vehicles again, not about fights over your political orientation. We're bipartisan. We don't endorse candidates, but we're out there trying to affect the dialogue in the key states during the election.
Yeah, it's existential, like you said, for lots of these automakers, American and European, who have, I think, this isn't just like an ego thing. We're talking about the history of the automobile, how it's developed right now. For better or worse, China's defining a lot of that with vehicles that have software and prices and ranges and things that work for consumers that are basically just outclassing everything else in the world. And like you said, that's the result of heavy subsidies. That always gets talked about with electric vehicles. And it's interesting because our government subsidizes them to some degree, not nearly as
Yeah.
aggressively as China, but we do subsidize things. And here come all the gasoline haters who will say that if we didn't subsidize EVs, would anyone be buying them? And we also subsidize gasoline because you have these economic lubricants in an economy like air travel that aren't necessarily profitable businesses, all other things being equal. But if we subsidize the fuel, subsidize the means people get around, that's just good for society in general. So I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer that subsidies do help people. Of course, everyone does like the free money on the end of the person buying the ID4 or their BZ4X, whatever their electric car is, and getting that $7,500 tax credit. But
A funny thing, just quickly
Yeah.
from our polling, you will hear from the think tanks that take a lot of refiners' money in D.C. Oh, Republicans hate the subsidies. I'm a right-wing Republican. So I thought, let's see what actual rank and file everyday Republican voters think. So we polled this nationally. And it turns out the Republican voters like the subsidy, getting a little money from Uncle Sam when you buy the car, more than the Democratic voters did, all those liberals who are supposed to be in love with subsidies. The truth is, both sides like them. The Republicans like them 4 or 5 points more, but it's a classic deal where the DC paid interpreters of telling members of Congress and others what the people think are not connected to the scientific results when we actually go out and survey regular Republicans. On the Chinese point, quickly, before 2020, the Chinese spending on subsidies was 7 times the American subsidy spending. They basically would say to people, you want $5 billion to build an EV plant? Go do it.
yeah,
Because we're flood the market with cheap EVs, wipe everybody out, and then figure out how to make money, and the Chinese government will back you up. Now, a lot of those companies went bankrupt, but they have built a very muscular EV manufacturing. A lot of people back in my hometown in Detroit who aren't in the industry have no idea that China produces far more cars than we do.
yeah.
And they're now doing a conquest strategy where they're flooding foreign markets like Thailand, Mexico, now in Europe, with quality cars. Now, people say to me, when Detroit in the 70s, Detroit was arrogant, the Japanese came in, the consumer won, and that's all true. But here's the thing, Japan's an ally. They're not a geostrategic rival. We can compete with them, and it's a good thing for the consumer, for everybody. It resulted in much better American, Japanese, and German cars.
Yeah.
The Chinese are not the same playbook on domination.
If you look at the 20th century, early 1920s, 30s, 40s, the auto industry was a chaotic place. You got the Dodge brothers, you've got Detroit, you've got Europe, you've got World War II and a bit of a problem with Germany. Of course, their car market matured and developed and everything worked out, but lots of turmoil there. China, to me, is all that in a crock pot, but accelerated, obviously. They've got lots of money. And like you said, they want international domination. They want to expand to other markets. They don't want to just be in Mexico. No matter what BYD says, they probably want to be in the US as well. It's scary that vertically integrated companies who are making the batteries, making so many of these components already, can also make the entire car. But help me understand, Mike, that for the US, why is this a partisan thing? Why do Republicans stereotypically not like EVs as much?
So this is the most interesting things we found in our survey. And it all makes total sense. When EVs, even in the guise of hybrids, the original non-plug-in hybrids, where basically the hybrid idea was a clever bit of engineering to recapture the energy when you break a car. Instead of dissipating it in heat, why don't we connect it to a generator brake so we can put it in a little battery and then have a small electric motor kick in as a way to get a little more fuel economy. Very clever, pioneered by several of the companies, particularly Toyota. When that started and the whole debate was on emissions, I don't know if you remember, Max, I think we should put a link to this on the site, the famous white polar bear ad for the Nissan Leaf when it came out, which it was a very creative piece of advertising. It showed a polar bear on an ice floe watching the polar ice cap melt. And the polar bear decided, oh, this is terrible. So we follow the polar bear on a journey, and it winds up in some suburban guy's driveway. And instead of eating the guy, gives him a big hug for driving a Nissan Leaf. It was effective advertising. It was terrible positioning because, love it or hate it, in the US of A, we are politically divided on climate change. Now, if I'm a European or Asian auto CEO and I look at my domestic politics where everybody more or less agrees on climate change or just debates on how to change behavior, I'm thinking this is a master stroke. We're on the green market. So the first wave of cars were marketed as green mobiles in the US. And the miscalculation there was, as a strategy to get into the market, sure, we'll sell some cars. But the little green leaves on it, the white polar bears hugging the guy for buying the Leaf, that put electric vehicles definitionally right in the middle of domestic American politics. And the Democrats jumped on it because there's always been a political debate. You met Green New Deal, green jobs. In Republican world, the other half of the country, that is code. And it's code for, we ask in our polling, is climate change a very serious problem we've got to do something about right now? Or is climate change overhyped by the media, not that big a deal? And that's a 60-40 split. There are 40% on the side who say overhyped, don't want to hear about it. So that morphed into the thing that when you were driving originally a hybrid, then particularly a battery electric vehicle, you were making a political statement. And that's a polarizing thing. You give away half the market. And you may say, oh, that's crazy. Okay, but when I grew up in Detroit around the car business. When a fat, bald 90-year-old guy walks into the Chevy dealership and said, I think it's time for me to get out in the dating pool again. I'm here for a Corvette. The salesman doesn't laugh at him for an hour. The salesman says, fantastic, here's a credit app. I got two back here. Let's pick yours. You move the unit. So by defining these things as green, they defined them as political. And as the market grew, they bumped into this problem. And our polling, we asked Republicans and Democrats, what do you like most about EVs? What's the most attractive thing? And they were the same when on number one, I don't want to pay for gas at $5 a gallon or whatever. I like fast and quiet. All the vehicle attributes work the same, essentially, margin of error with both parties. They really help the environment. Wham, 30 points. So the green marketing was clever for the first 2% of the market, but it left a legacy we're trying to crawl out of now. I'll just finish up. One of the smart industry reporters at New York Times pointed me at this, and I looked into it. In many ways, the smartest marketers in the electric vehicle space are Polaris, who make those ATV vehicles for hunters, outdoor ranchers, stuff like that.
Yeah.
They sell heavily into red states. They sell everywhere. Those things can cost over $35,000, the big four-wheel buggies.
The side-by-sides, yeah.
Yeah, they're expensive. They're pretty high-tech. They have an electric model. They don't call it electric. They call it kinetic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a waiting list, months long, to get one. It's very hard to get one at a top price, no discount. They pitch it not as, hey, you're going to save the trees. They pitch it as when you're hunting and you want to sneak up on the prey with stealth, get your knife ready, the kinetic. And the things are a huge hit because they're selling the use case and they know their audience. So what we're trying to do is move the industry toward, they get it. Jim Farley did a great speech at the Aspen Ideas Festival you can find online. CNBC covered it. And he wrote an op-ed, I think they posted on LinkedIn, all about this.
Yeah.
And how it's got to be a use case argument because then it works like a charm. When it becomes, I'm for Biden, I'm an EV, I'm for Trump, I can't drive an EV, and it's a political statement, not a car for crying out loud, it gums everything up. And that's where we are right now. And of course, a campaign fight makes it worse. Donald Trump bashing EVs one day, then Elon's with him, and he says, oh, I got to keep Elon happy. I don't hate him that much. Then he's back to bashing him. It gets in the way. And the more we make this about politics, the better it is for our Chinese adversaries.
Because we're not really unified as a market. And the domestic automakers here, we've seen headlines, Ford and GM always get cold feet when they see, oh, maybe the demand's not here that we thought was going to be here. So let's not build this massive battery plant in Michigan. On the Polaris,
it's a tough timing bet for them.
Absolutely.
Because they know, and this is like starting a landline telephone company in 1904.
Yeah.
We got to go spend a fortune putting copper wire under the streets and into houses. You know how expensive that is? It'll take us 50 years to make our money back.
Yeah.
But that was a regulated industry. There used to be like 18 phone companies in New York all competing. So the regulator said, all right, you can make these rates to make enough money to, over a reasonable amount of time, pay back the capital investment. Then you make money forever. We open up more competition. Look at long distance. It's been doing nothing but going down. The Farleys of the world and the Olas at Mercedes in Stuttgart, the South Koreans who've done very well, they got to make a bet of, all right, we pour in billions at the front, and when do we make it on the back end? And if they go too early and they got massive inventory and they're losing 20 grand a car, they go out of business.
Yeah.
If they go too late, they never get the market share. It's a huge, tough billion-dollar bet, and they all went aggressive. And now, because they can't lose billions of dollars, they're pulling back, and they see this problem in the market. There's a lot of bad, this as a journalist in the space. There's so much bad popular press. EVs are collapsing.
Yeah.
No, they're growing like hotcakes. The only question is, are they growing at 10% a year or 50?
Well, it's a derivative, right? People look at the rate of change for sales. And so it's not sales are down over last year, which lots of people would just tell you, no, it is down in terms of growth. So that's also just natural for evolving markets. But like you said, there's all these headwinds and it's hard. And I think a lot of industry experts call this the valley of death, basically, like for any new industry, but particularly one, telephones, vehicles, right? Where you have to roll out infrastructure, you have to roll out manufacturing, you have to roll out chargers. It's not trivial. On the Polaris thing, really quickly, back in my career as a journalist, I went up to Minnesota, I think to their headquarters, and we did an event with the Ranger XP Kinetic. They never once said anything about it being green or environmental.
Right.
It was all, silent torque. It's really powerful. It's really nice for going off-road. Even though they sell crazy 30,000 toys for going off-road, this was the practical, quote-unquote, one. But you could have lots of fun with it, too, because it was really powerful, because it was electric. So they were making a big...
And try to buy one. Show up with 40 grand cash at a Polaris dealer, and they'll tell you to come back in a year.
And tell me, and the comments on that video
fast.
when we published it was everyone saying $30,000 for a side-by-side. You're not going to catch me doing that. But guess what? Turns out there's actually a market for that, niche as it may be. It seems like they're doing well there. So
I have a friend who's a Hollywood director and Rivian driver, and he's got a Ford Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
He got two of them. He's a fanatic for this stuff. He's great. I'm going to get him to do a video for us. But anyway, he is a more leftist center guy. But he's got the one thing I want to get my hands on is Polaris, because he's got a ranch. And anyway, so no, go where the customer is.
Absolutely.
And the car industry knows that. But the sugar high of starting green, mostly from foreign companies who didn't quite get it, because, it's natural to project your own politics.
Yeah.
It's like that over there, just different language. They're in a hole. So the first thing I tell the company is, I never want to see a green leaf on a car again. And then I meet with the environmental groups who are great, but they don't really like hearing the environmental thing. I say, you don't understand. If you get a guy to switch to an electric vehicle in the pickup truck, because they're not towing a lot, good use case, makes sense for them. Put them in a Ford Lightning as a contractor. Those are pretty popular now. You don't have to put a Save the Whales sticker on the back window next to the NRA sticker. You get your CO2 output per vehicle average result.
Yeah, there's a
proven. Get a car they love.
There's a proven level of success here too, because like you were saying, hybrids were first marketed this way, as were the first generation of what we'll charitably call compliance EVs, like the Leaf. It was the South Park episode with everyone with the Priuses and smelling their own farts, and that was the culture. But then let's flash forward to today. Okay, lots of consumers, especially on the right, maybe aren't ready for battery EVs. But the appetite for hybrids is now seemingly crossed the party line. It's crossed economic lines. Toyota and Honda, lots of the major Japanese automakers have huge fleets of hybrids. And guess what? Everyone's behind it because it's being sold now on a matter of economy, and you're paying less for gas.
And it's safety. I don't have to worry about charging. I have the gas backup. Hybrids I'm glad they're working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad Ford can't make enough of that small Maverick hybrid pickup truck, and they're ramping up. There's a lot of success. The other player I got to salute in this are the innovators like Rivian, who are on the product side doing incredible, and they're growing fast. And BMW, I think worldwide might be, like number 3 now, because they've taken the torque thing and turned it into a performance pitch. So they're coming around, they're getting it, but the favor we can do is make them vehicles again, not just politics. And again, open up the jobs front. In fact, here's a spot we're doing that's going up in Michigan, literally to remind people there, because we know from polling, nobody has an idea. There are so many EV jobs in Michigan. This is a good thing. We tested this spot online.
Big oil, at it again, trashing electric vehicles. even those made and designed here in Michigan. Why? Big money. The average family spends $2,000 a year on gas. EVs make that go away. So Big Oil wants EVs to go away and cost Michigan thousands of jobs. Nobody wants to ban gas cars. Just let consumers choose. Don't be hustled by Big Oil. They're not on your side. Paid for by the American EV Jobs Alliance.
We took 400 voters online, statistically selected. This is how we do spot testing for anybody who's curious. We asked them some questions. Is the move to electric vehicles, which in politics is code for what the Democrats are up to, is that good for Michigan jobs and Michigan's economy? Do you agree, disagree? And less than half agreed. Then we showed them an Allstate commercial, not about EVs or whatever it was, some generic commercial, and we asked them again, there's no change. The other 200 people, we showed the spot right here, and afterward, among Trump voters, we got a 19% increase. Among women, 17%. Among everybody, 11 points, because they don't know the story. This is a jobs issue for the campaign.
Yeah.
So that and attributes are how we get the tangled political spaghetti out of it and get it back to, wouldn't it be great not to spend $2,000 a year on gas, never go to a transmission shop, instant acceleration, quiet? And by the way, you only drive 45 miles, most people, a day at most, and you can plug it in your garage. And we're now hitting 300-mile range on most new EVs, or just short of that. I've driven a Volkswagen ID4 across America, and I'm on my third time. I did it this summer. We have a house in New Hampshire. Families in LA. And I love driving across the country. I'm doing it right now. That's how I got to Chicago. I'm coming home. On this trip, I have had only one bumpy charging. I went up to old Geneso, Illinois, where the Electron America station seems to always be offline. So I had to go to a Ford dealer who had a great setup. And that's it. Every single time it's worked. It has been amazingly different than 2 years ago. And I even have to begrudgingly give a salute to Electrify America. I have not had to wait at a station. I pull up, plug in, auto charge, I'm gone.
Huh.
And boy, oh boys, I'm rambling now, so you can cut this out. But Mike DeWine, the old meat and potatoes governor of Ohio, who was the first to get an EV station built, which is another thing maybe we talk about. Those GM EV Go stations on the Ohio Turnpike are magnificent. At Flying J in those places. That wheel is turning.
Yes, chargers have to work, and that's getting better and better iteratively, as we'd expect and hope, and that's been good, because especially earlier in my time as an EV journalist, a lot of the story was this just isn't working, especially from the non-Tesla end of things. You brought up several things there. There's the jobs angle, and we've seen this Volvo, Polestar, Hyundai. A lot of new players like Rivian are building factories in Georgia and South Carolina, pretty red states whose governors like the sound of jobs. And I'm sure they're getting tax benefits for it, but this is good old classic American industry. And right now, it's just a question of they've got to get the capital to actually justify that and be aggressive about moving forward with it. But
if it were China, they'd call the government. We'd like to put 3 plants in Alabama.
Right.
Okay, go.
That's the beauty and the horror of the American system right there. But we do have, you brought this up too with your ID4, right? The product is there. In my opinion, the product is very good. And also the advantage that we have, despite we may not be able to make batteries for super cheap prices like China, but the history of American innovation is lending itself here. We're good at making chips. Look at NVIDIA and Intel and all these companies. We're also very good at making cars and innovations. And so what is the biggest player in the EV market globally? It's Tesla, who's an American company. And then Lucid, Rivian, and these startups are really showcasing, hopefully, what's next to come with the technology for efficiency and range. They haven't quite crossed the chasm that Tesla has into profitability, but they're on their way, and that's really exciting. But I mentioned the big T word Tesla there, and I do want to get your thoughts on their CEO, Elon Musk, who's had his own rightward shift, and what that is all about, how you think that might affect this market.
We have a blog post about it with some charts at evpolitics.org in our polling. So the Elon numbers are among the most interesting in the poll. He has literally gone from EV Jesus over to Fox News, the next Sean Hannity. And so there's a lot of, in his personal brand, there's a lot of bewilderment and new affection. If you're a Democrat, we ask the question, is Elon Musk a good ambassador for EVs? If you're a Democrat, 2-1, you say absolutely not. If you're a Republican, 2-1, you say yes, very good ambassador, love him. That coin has two sides. On one side, and same with favorable, unfavorable, all the things we test like a candidate. So If you're the Tesla chief marketing officer, my guess is you go to work every day and by noon, you're staring at your desk with a bottle of whiskey and a revolver. And you can see the Tesla market share shrinking. They've been dominant. They're a huge success story. But now, at long last, as the Fords, the Kias, the BMWs, the Mercedes, and the Volkswagens have woken up, they're taking share away from Tesla.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that in some of the original Tesla, big, urban, often blue voting markets, the brand has some real headwinds now based on this. You can see it in the sales figures over the last 4 to 6 quarters. You can see bumper stickers in Los Angeles, a huge EV market.
Yeah.
So from a sales point of view, very important. People forget LA County is 11 million people.
Yeah.
That is a mass. That's like anyway, it's big and vital for EVs. Bumper stickers. I bought this before Elon went crazy. On the other hand, Elon has a certain brand equity among that 40% of buyers where EV adoption is a lot lower, the Republicans, where he could open some doors. And he's doing a little bit in the campaign. Is he going to be Nixon to China to help move the Republican needle on EV? Or is he going to be the guy that a year from now, the Tesla board is saying, this is a crisis level thing. How do we get him away from our brand? And with his power over the stock, that'll be tricky, if not impossible. So Elon's a huge, complicated thing here. Ned, I think you got to give him, put it this way. Here would be my pitch to Elon if he popped up. I said, you get a special trophy. You have done more to create the modern electric car industry than everybody. You've done the biggest move since Detroit Electric in 1911. At the beginning of the auto industry, electric cars were number one. They were marketed to women because women didn't want to deal with the crank and all the oil and grease. So the electric cars were a big hit. And now they're back, and that's Elon. He gets the credit on the mass production basis, along with some unheralded engineers from the original General Motors and the EV1 and some of the brilliant First Technical stuff. They're long-lost heroes and the greater cause too.
Yeah.
But now you're the only guy in the history of the planet who can do it twice. You can have a lot to do with breaking down the Republican EV problem because they trust you. Or a lot of them. Nothing is ever 100% homogeneous. So you can do it twice if you choose to, which requires discipline, focused, and a message. And that traditionally is not Elon.
Yeah.
But he is a very rare bird in all this with fascinating numbers. And I encourage people curious about it to find the blog post we have, which has some of the charts in the poll.
We'll put that in the show notes, but it is a fascinating cultural shift because for me as an EV advocate, I still like Tesla, the company, and I may or may not get along with his politics, but
but the product appeals.
The product appeals. The thing that worries me is, like you said, it's the distraction, the discipline. I wouldn't so much mind if Elon stayed on the course, making electric cars. It seems like he's gotten bored of that and is talking about robo-taxis and self-driving cars now, and that's the future he sees for Tesla. And that may or may not be.
I just want to applaud that because I think you are onto something.
Yeah.
Here's what I think is in Elon's head. When he shut down all the capital or most of the spending on the supercharger network, I think Elon was thinking, all right, the future is going to be robo-taxis.
Yeah.
And robo-taxi is a car that works 18 hours a day and charges 6.
Mm-hmm.
And that means we need to make a lot less cars because right now the average car doesn't do anything 90% of the time. It's sitting there.
Yep.
So I'm going to get out of the mass car manufacturing business. And do I really need 500 really smart people in a room who I'm paying good money to, finding very clever ways to spend money building charging stations that may no longer be necessary? Or let's make that Mercedes and Stellantis and Ford's problem to go spend billions. Because the charging business is a lousy business. That's one of the problems. The power costs so much. You often break even or make a tiny bit of money, not unlike retail gasoline. So when you go charge at EVgo and you pay them the $17, they're lucky to make $2 in that. And hopefully they're getting some kind of recurring membership fee. It's why all those companies, their balance sheets are a disaster. So I think I've got 500 people paying for a future that may not be here anymore in 20 years. And let's go make that everybody else's problem. I can start to monetize the one I have.
Yeah.
Stop spending money on CapEx and try to milk it as a cash flow business. So I think that's his thinking. But for Tesla products, you're right. The next evolution, it may no longer be a focus for them. He said,
Yeah,
all right, let
and
everybody else
right
do
as
that.
we're seeing Lucid and Rivian and other companies, from my perspective, take the IP torch of intellectual property and actual car development. Let's make more efficient
Yeah,
motors. Let's make stuff that goes off road
right.
really well, right? Tesla doesn't seem to be as interested in doing that. Okay,
They're falling
there's the
behind for the
Cybertruck,
first
which
time.
is a
Yeah,
fascinating, I think, sorry, as a marketing stunt alone, that's maybe
yeah,
well worth it. I don't know, but
yeah.
as a
I hate them. Who loves them? A lot of my Republican
yeah,
friends.
no,
To me,
I
it's a
remember in
master move.
Florida, we did a road trip. We started in Florida. People love the Cybertruck. Folk, no, we're not
Yeah,
just talking Tesla drivers, because believe it or not, there's actually a lot of EV drivers in Florida. But folks pulling up in a Jeep Gladiator with a bullet hole, or sorry, a bullet
yeah.
shell as the antenna, like very red meat people. They love the Cybertruck. So that might be fascinating in itself. We should do a whole episode on it.
Somebody gave Trump a big one with purple eagles on it and
Yeah,
everything.
I
So
can't
he
see
should
it so
drive it
much being
around
his
and move
style
some
either,
mirrors.
but who knows?
No, he did own a Roadster allegedly years ago. I
Yes.
don't know if he ever drove it. Yeah, and another just Tesla product point. My main EV is a BMW iX. We have an ID4 and an iX, and I love that. I'll put that iX up against the Tesla X any day of the week.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. The vehicle product attribute stuff, there are some very competitive non-Tesla vehicles out there that I think are even surpassing.
Yeah.
So,
So the product is interesting. Tesla may be falling behind. What fascinates me is the cultural element back to Elon's rightward shift. If we look at like the beginning of the Biden administration, it seems so long ago now, but they invited lots of EV leaders onto stage. They notably did not invite Elon, but they
yeah,
didn't invite Mari Barra of GM, who, as you pointed out with EV1, has had their own checkered history around EVs. And they said, Mary, you led. And I think that really did. Elon, a lot like Trump, does seem to be a very ego-driven person.
oh yeah, I'm
And that
sure he
probably,
remembers the
yeah,
stuff.
and that probably
Yeah,
wasn't very good for his ego, given, as we've said,
yeah.
rightfully, he deserves a lot of credit for.
And it wasn't very smart of the Biden
No,
administration.
I mean,
Politics, you're in the friend-making
yeah,
business, not
so
the enemy-making
that to
business.
me seemed like a colossal mistake on their end. And now that pivots me to where you are, Mike, right now in a hotel room at the DNC in Chicago. Okay, Trump, like Elon, turns a lot of people's stomachs. There's even some Republican voters who probably will not vote for him, just like in 2020, just like also in
Yeah, no,
2016.
there's defection.
So with that in mind, are Democrats doing anything to moderate the EV message, or is that a concern at all, or what's
You
going on
know,
there?
the Democrats, and there's no unified command structure. There is in the campaign, but the kind of Democrat consultant and political world, the conventional wisdom is they used to, and they would test this. Hey, people like jobs, and our voters like green, so we're going to call them green jobs. But they underestimated how polarizing green is, because if you're in the Detroit suburbs, or the Atlanta suburbs, or Pennsylvania, one of these 5 or 6 states that actually decide the presidential race, and you're 48 years old, and you're working in traditional manufacturing, and you hear green new job, that is code to you. And you like the new job, but when you hear green, here's what you think. You don't think, I'm helping save the planet. You think, this means this plant's going away, that I understand, my friends are here, I know this job. And now I'm going to have to go to the community college and sit in a room with 23-year-olds smirking and giggling about me, and I'm going to have to learn computers. And God damn it, I didn't spend 30 years learning how to work a lathe to go be the dumbest guy in a class full of kids. Yeah, I'm still having trouble with the phone. My kid helps. No, thank you. And by the way, those jobs are all going south. This is a metal bending town. My dad bent metal, put us in the metal class. But when we talk about EV manufacturing jobs, and we show the Lightning plant, the Rivian plant, the plant in Alabama for Mercedes-Benz, the new Hyundai and Kia facilities, those are manufacturing jobs that people understand. I've run 3 successful Michigan governor races. We never let a campaign go by where we weren't talking about more paying manufacturing jobs, because that was a language people understood. And when you put green into it, you scare them away. The green outcome is good. But when you run a politics, and this is where the Democrats made a mistake, telling people with a PhD in yoga charging $200 an hour and making a good living in Marin County, yay green, the guy on the spot welding gear in Ohio is not hearing the same message. And this is something we're banging on. Move the messaging to manufacturing jobs. That's why we're doing the campaign in Michigan. And they're starting to get it. We're just wrapping up the convention. Here's what I have not heard from the podium. Green New Deal. That is dead as a doornail politically. So the Democrats are learning, but they were slow to this.
Yep.
Political parties get greedy. So they're thinking we can have our cake and eat it too. We can get green and jobs. We'll get 100%. And the two were not fitting together out there in voter world.
Right.
So the Dems are getting better, but the problem is they've made enough of a mistake. Repubs, and this always happens, when one party gets over its skis, the other party will exploit it. That's why Trump's out there saying this green stuff's going to wipe out your job.
Yep.
Pittsburgh will be gone. You see that smokestack where you work? That means they've declared war on you, and you're going to be working in a Burger King, and you're going to lose your house. And fear works in politics.
Yeah.
The other problem is the United Auto Workers. And I'm actually a conservative Republican. I belong to two unions. My dad started out, he's a night school lawyer. First job he had was on a truck in Jimmy Hoffa's local. My grandfather, another night school lawyer, started out at Hudson Motor Company. My other grandparents, UAW, their whole life. So I am fond of what the United Auto Workers have done. But the internal politics of the UAW are dominated by the old guys of seniority. And their attitude is 5 more years and I'm out of here with a great high-end wage, fantastic health care, and a pension.
Yeah.
Deal very few workers in America outside of government workers get anymore. The younger workers and the people in the supply chain, which is heavily non-union, would like to keep manufacturing jobs in the auto industry. So when Sean Fain gets up and says, these EVs are terrible because you can build an assembly plant with 600 people instead of 2,000, we got to kill EVs, and it scares the Democratic pulse away, he is doing a terrible disservice to his membership, because the real choice is that modern EV plant that can build a car with 600 to 800 people, is that going to be in North America, particularly the U.S., with those people making a decent American manufacturing wage, or is it going to be in China with auto workers who make $9 or $10 an hour, 1/8 to 1/10 of what an American worker makes in a union or non-union plant?
Yeah.
And we're doing some polling on this in Michigan because we want to explain to the media that Sean Fain is not the voice of his membership on all topics. He's the voice on the membership if we want a better deal. And the story of the last strike was, for the first time really in recent UAW history, the lower tier workers who are much younger finally got a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Generally, most of these labor days are about the old guys of seniority who run the union getting a lot more money and the younger workers getting in not better deal.
Mm-hmm.
So that fulcrum shift, the power in the union is shifting, and the views on EVs, I think, among the rank and file, and we're going to do some research to prove this point, are much more pro-EV than the stereotypical Sean Fain. The only plant I care about is a Ford F-350 plant with 3,000.
Yeah, I mean,
because that's not the future.
if we want manufacturing, we can't let it slip away. Because I think one way or another, there's a lot of smart people in the U.S., born in the U.S., who immigrate into the U.S., who are going to come up with new motors and new battery tech. We've already seen it. The LFP battery tech and so much exciting stuff people talk about in China was first developed in the U.S. I'm not worried about the eggheads and the people with the college degrees doing that. I am, though, concerned with manufacturing, looking at the history, thinking, look at chips. We still develop, again, we have great IP for chips, and that's driving a lot of the US stock market right now, and AI, whatever that boom might be. But we don't manufacture them. We rely on Taiwan or maybe Japan or other countries for that.
Right.
Taiwan is obviously really delicate. And when we try to do it here, we find we're 15 years behind. Lots of the workers aren't trained, and it's this huge uphill battle. So with EVs, there's this opportunity to not be in that situation, but it still, to me, seems a little bit like a catch-up race.
My father-in-law was a Xerox executive, and he likes the mouse, the graphic computer innovation. We invented all that in Stanford at Xerox, and we gave it all away. Led to Steve Jobs and Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some truth to that. The Brits, they invented radar and early aviation. You can credit a lot of the development of the jet engine there. There's still a British aviation industry, but nothing like it used to be. So yeah, you can have the IP, but you've got to lead in advanced manufacturing. And again, the good news is we're still, and manufacturing is having a comeback now. And I'll give, as a partisan Republican, albeit a Trump anti-Trumper from way back, I'll give the Biden administration credit. We are having a renaissance in value-added manufacturing here in the U.S. right now. The corner is turned. And I know Republican politicians who are non-federal, a couple of congressmen, but governors, speakers of the state house from red states saying, yeah, all this EV bashing, it gets them clapping because they don't know. But Jesus, here in Georgia or Kansas, how much good a $2.5 billion assembly plant does for a community? Those are real jobs with real money. It can turn a corner of my state around. Georgia has won a huge lottery. They're number one in EV investment. Michigan's number two in new plants. We're talking 30,000 new jobs and growing. Tens of billions of dollars in new plant investment. And these Pauls there, the local guys who live in the real world, not Washington, know they've won the lottery. And so we have a lot of secret Republican fans who want us to succeed.
We need it.
And go ahead.
No, but thank you so much for foreshadowing that. We really do have to look, I think, at Georgia, at South Carolina. I think in future episodes, we're going to talk to some people more on the ground there with some expertise about that. But I think absolutely the manufacturing story here, we just can't put a big enough.
And it's a secret. Nobody knows, which is why we're running TV ads in Michigan soon and digital ads, saying, bet you didn't know this. And that's why when we test that spot, it goes through the roof. You're going to have a lot of good guests. We're not going to give them all away now, but I know the secret list. And I bumped into I'll hint one, Secretary Buttigieg is anxious to get on here and make the case. So if you're interested in EVs and politics and manufacturing, I think this is going to be a fun podcast to listen to during maybe we'll do contests too. We can give away some of our fine merch. I was wearing this around the convention and people asked me for more. We'll make this fun, Max, and you're the perfect guy to host it.
Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity, and thanks for being the first guest, and I'm looking forward to having many more on. Thank you once more to Mike for being our first guest, and thank you all of you for listening. We'll have plenty of more interesting shows coming up, so stay tuned and look out for our episodes to come weekly in the future. In the meantime, if you want to give us a like on YouTube, rate us on your podcast app of choice, that is all very much appreciated. Thanks, and see you next time.